Welcome to Practical Talk Time. I'm your host, Usha Kumar. Today, I have with me a very distinguished guest. He's well known to you all, and he's a well-known TV personality. It's Ira Joe Fisher, and he's here today to discuss poetry, especially because April has been declared as the Poetry Month by the Academy of American Poets. I think it only started as recent as 1996. But anyway, we want to celebrate it. And please join me in welcoming Ira Fisher.
Hello, Usha. How nice to see you again.
It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
And it's been a year since you were here.
Has it been that long?
Yes. We were here for the same Poetry Month last year.
But we recorded the program. This is kind of
We
exciting
did.
that it's live. Anything can happen here, Usha.
Oh,
This
yes.
is good.
Yes. It's very exciting, and I can't wait to discuss all the new developments in poetry in the last year.
Okay. I don't know how many developments there are, but sure, let's talk about it. You know why April is National Poetry Month? Do you know why that is?
Why is it?
Because Shakespeare was born in the month of April.
Yes.
On the 23rd, and Shakespeare also died on the 23rd of April. Nice symmetry there. Born on the day, or died on the day you were born.
And did he write poetry?
Oh, sure.
I mean, in his drama?
His plays are all poetry. And then he wrote, of course, 140-some sonnets and narrative poems. Oh, sure. Shakespeare was incapable of writing anything that wasn't poetry. He was just a marvel. And I worship him. His name ought to be said always like a chorus of voices. It ought to be William Shakespeare. They ought to be. His name ought always to be sung by a large group of people.
Yeah, it's not just the words. It's the way he wrote the words, the sentences.
Sure.
There are so many quotes from his writing.
He was a marvel at syntax, but also, and I think this is true of many poets, Robert Frost, Emily Dickinson, he was a great psychologist. He really, truly was. One would only need to read Shakespeare or read Robert Frost or read Emily Dickinson, and you would get a good course in psychology, in human psychology. Harold Bloom made the claim that it was Shakespeare who invented the human, in that it's because of Shakespeare we know how to react to certain situations, happy, sad, tragic, joyful in our lives.
Yeah, and Shakespeare has described so many different characters so beautifully. And, one has to really read Shakespeare to understand how the character progresses and how much each character can teach us in terms of
I agree.
What you said,
I
psychology.
Agree. Yes, I love Shakespeare. And I love April for that reason, because it does, for 30 days anyway, focuses attention on this wonderful thing called poetry.
Speaking of the Poetry Month, this same Academy of American Poets, I think they publish a poster every year. And they have
Am I on it?
I don't know, not the poster.
Oh, shoot.
You're probably in one of their, collection of the best poems.
I doubt that, but wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice?
I just want to know something about what you've been doing of late.
Well, regarding poetry, I continue to write it, and I continue also to claim I teach it. I always caution my students. I teach at the University of Connecticut, and I teach at Mercy College, but I always tell my students on the first day of class that I'm here somewhat as a fraud, because you cannot teach poetry. It can only be encountered, and that's really what my job is. I urge the student to get on the wavelength of poetry and find something that will resonate with you, which sounds poetic or lofty or, I don't know, professorial. I don't mean it to. I live always in poetry. I just come out to visit, to do different things. But poetry is a wonderful calling and a wonderful place to dwell.
What about those students who want to learn how to write poems?
Well, the thing is, my opinion and my advice to that student is read, read, read. And I'm absolutely serious about that. To read poetry is to inspire you to want to create your own. That's how it was for me. And I think that's how it is for anyone who calls himself or herself a poet in this age in which we live. But you have to read. A poet is only a part-time writer, but needs by necessity to be a full-time reader.
Just like if you have to be a voracious reader
Yeah, I
to be
think
a
so.
writer?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Dorothy Parker had a great quotation. She said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And Nathaniel Hawthorne said, easy reading is damned hard writing. I like that.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It is.
And it is very true, too.
I think it is.
Anyone who tried writing anything would know that.
Well, sure. But the thing is, you need to keep putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard in the age in which we live. But it just seems to me to be such a wonderful, appealing calling, and I love living in the world of words.
Yeah. And why should poetry be celebrated now?
Separated from what?
Celebrated.
Oh, celebrated. I think it's separated. Oh, well, it should be separated because, celebrated, it should never be separated. Poetry should be celebrated, Usha, I believe, because it really is one of the primal forces in the human being. We first spoke before we wrote. There was a spoken language long before there was a written language, and poetry was a vehicle for me to pass on the legends and the music and the dreams of my tribe to your tribe, and likewise to receive your dreams and legends and music. And it was done via poetry. At a practical application, easier to remember if it's rhythmical, if it rhymes, so it's easier to remember. And I like that. Whether or not it's true, it's such a beautiful legend, it ought to be true. And I think it's a primal force in the human soul, the rhythm and the sense, the rapture that is poetry.
I know that people around the world, speaking all these various different languages, they write poems in their own languages.
Yes.
And true to what you just said, for thousands of years, they've been passing down information in the form of poetry.
Yeah.
And I know that from our Indian,
Oh, you have a rich
literature.
heritage, of course.
Yes, especially the language of Sanskrit. And there have been verses and verses written in Sanskrit in so many subjects. And these were done at a time when there was no paper or pen. And so that's what they did. Learned all the verses
Sure.
in memory and then passed it down.
I think we've become a little bit lazy, and with our cell phones and our computers, that we are a tad lazy and don't take the time to remember, to memorize such things. But yes, there was a
That's
time
true.
in human history when that was just an accepted fact.
Yeah, now there's no need to remember.
No,
You
there
just
isn't.
click what you want and the information is right there. You can just read off of it.
Yeah.
There's no
I
need
remember
to memorize.
in graduate school, we were required to memorize a certain amount of poetry. And you might, at first blush, say, oh, come on, I've got enough to do. I don't want to do that. But you know what? It became such a joy, and is still such a joy, to retain some of that poetry and to simply call upon it in an appropriate moment, or even in an inappropriate moment. It's just such a delight.
Speaking of this kind of poetry that has been written and passed down, those poems were really long.
Well,
Many
yes.
of those were. Some of the epics
Yep.
that have been passed down.
That's where we get the word, epic poem. You're right. I'm not one who writes long poems. However, I have a book coming out in August of this year, and it does have the longest poem I've ever written, and I worked on it. I can't remember whether it's for 8 years or for 10 years, and it runs some 30, 31 pages. And that's uncustomary for me. My poems usually run, well, usually one page, sometimes one or two. So this was quite a project for me, but a project that I adored.
Yeah, most of the modern poetry, have poems that are really short.
Well, yes, it varies from individual to individual. You, of course, have Walt Whitman. You have Allen Ginsberg, who wrote really long and rambling poems. And the poems themselves are long, but the lines that comprise these poems are long also. Then you have Emily Dickinson or
Yes.
Robert Frost, who
Very
wrote in a more
close.
compact way. Much of Frost's poetry is written that way. Some of it's longer, but Dickinson seldom wrote long poems.
And don't you think poems should be read aloud?
Oh, indeed. Yes, indeed. This is what I always advise my students. Well, in fact, I assign them this task that you have to read a poem at least 5 times. An assigned poem must be read at least 5 times, and it must be read aloud. If that means in the company of your family at the dinner table, so be it. Or perhaps a better idea would be to go off to the privacy of your room or a back area of Starbucks but read the poem aloud, because this is how it really comes alive. It helps to put you on the wavelength of it.
And sometimes even though you're reading it, it's not really your voice. It's the voice of the poet.
That's an excellent point. Yes,
Right?
that's an excellent point. Yeah, you talked about Sanskrit. T.S. Eliot was someone who understood Sanskrit. I don't,
Oh.
and he would incorporate that into his poetry, or the sensibility of Sanskrit. Yes, and to be able to enter into another language and to hear that voice, what a great gift that is! What a great gift that is! That's a good point you make. I like that.
Right. Thank you. Another thing I notice in poetry is that, it calls for a creative use of words
Well,
and language itself. You need real skill in the language, otherwise you can't really write
Well, see,
poetry.
this is what I think, at least by osmosis, you get that skill in language by being, as you say, the voracious reader. I believe that to be true. But the nice thing is, Shakespeare gave us, we were talking about Shakespeare, gave us all these wonderful poems and plays, and all of the plays are written in verse, blank verse or rhymed, iambic pentameter. They're glorious, they're beautiful, but you know what? Shakespeare did not copyright a single word. My point being, the word belongs equally to you and to me, and so we can take that word, we can take that notion and put it to our own purpose when it comes to poetry. And that's what I love about it. So, yes, syntax, the order of the words within a line, within a sentence, have a certain demand, but the words belong to us, and let's juggle them, let's play with them, have fun with them.
What age is the right age to be introduced to poetry?
I think when one is in the womb, one ought to be hearing poems being read through mom's tummy to that baby. I would read poems to my children, who are now grown into their 20s and 30s, and a couple of them are indeed poets, but they benefited from being from encountering language that is beautiful and glorious. I think a beautiful world deserves beautiful language, and if the world isn't beautiful, maybe that beauty can be returned or restored by using beautiful language to talk about it.
Do your children write poetry too?
Yes, one of my children does. My daughter. I have 3 sons and a daughter, and my daughter writes poetry. They're all writers, as it happens. One of my sons is also a poet. Forgive me, but he writes poetry. I have a newspaper editor's son, and my 2 youngest children, my daughter and my youngest son, write stand-up comedy and are quite good at that. Yeah, and then my second son is also a poet.
Oh,
And a
that's
very good one.
wonderful. So
Yeah, it
your
is.
influence has really been,
Well, I think
really shaped them.
Well, perhaps so, but he has his own tastes in poetry, and has writers he prefers different than writers I prefer. So he has his own mind and his own sensibility.
I think,
But we've talked about it.
yeah,
Yes.
I know the last time. Also, we can't stress enough the need to read to your children.
I
right?
agree.
Most parents think that the television should take care of the children, or whatever they have to learn it from school. But it's very important.
Oh, I agree with you, and we certainly did that with our children. And yes, to encourage and to foster a comfort with words and an ease with words is something is a great gift we can and ought to give, yes, to our children. Don't let television raise your children. And I don't want to sound hypocritical, because I've spent my career in television. But you also have to step away from it and to just embrace the joy of words. And there's nothing more beautiful than for the human ear to hear the human voice speaking words. And poetry is, to me, the highest calling in that.
Again, just as you said, there have been wonderful television programs that
Yes.
I've let my son watch quite a bit.
Right.
Well, it could have been in science or English or the arts. But, I mean, that kind of good quality programming is needed.
Well, it is.
To keep the children entertained and educated.
here we sit in the studio at Comcast, and the proliferation of cable is something that in our lifetime we have experienced. Our children, of course, take it for granted that you have 100 gazillion stations from which to choose. I remember the time when there were only 3, and they were black and white and snowy. It's good, yes, to have our culture expanded. It just needs to be very vehemently guarded that it is, in fact, culture and not lacking in that sort of thing. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes that is the case with television, but it is the case with literature, too.
Yeah. Poetry is not that far removed from literature.
Well, poetry is a massive part of literature. Poetry is not that far removed from conversation. And to cite evidence of that, we have Robert Frost, William Wordsworth, and what a great name for a poet, isn't it?
Yeah, William Wordsworth.
Yeah, what a great name. Their intention, their approach, their philosophy, and their success came in incorporating ordinary, demotic speech, conversation into their poetry. And that shows that, there's poetry in everything. In what we would perhaps otherwise characterized as ordinary, now you lift it to the world of literature.
Yeah. Poetry is revered around the world, and very often it's the young people that are into it.
Well, I don't think that's unusual. There's a wonderful American poet who they say is no longer living, but my theory is poets never die. That's why I became a poet, because you live forever, because the poem continues to speak to you. But William Stafford would read his poems at readings, and he was always asked at the end of the reading, when did you start loving poetry? And his answer is beautiful. He said, when did you stop? As children, we love poetry. The hickory dickory dock, London Bridge is falling down. We love and embrace poetry. It doesn't have to make narrative sense. It sounds wonderful. It's fun to say. And if we bring that with us into adulthood, we continue to not only be a poet, but to appreciate this great grace that is poetry.
What do you think of American poetry?
Well, do you mean back in Anne Bradstreet's time in the 17th century? I think she's wonderful. We move into the 1800s. I worship Emily Dickinson. I'm putting together an Emily Dickinson course that I'm going to teach at the University of Connecticut in Torrington come the fall. I worship Emily Dickinson. I love Emily Dickinson. Walt Whitman, for heaven's sakes. Then you have Emerson.
He's one of those that wrote long poems.
Yes.
We'll come back to that.
Yes, he did. Song of Myself and Leaves of Grass. And then moving into the 20th century, again, I worship Robert Frost, and I love T.S. Eliot. No, I don't love T.S. Eliot. No, I love T.S. Eliot. I just don't like him. He just seemed like a stuffy old guy. But he wrote some the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, or The Wastelander, a challenge, elusive, dense, but worth the work. And this is another thing that...
Of course, he lived in a different time.
Well, yes,
period.
But poetry is a conversation of and for all time. And that's why you can read Shakespeare 448 years ago, he was born. 448 years ago, but he continues to speak to us today in a language we can understand. You have to get on his wavelength. You have to figure out the these and thous and the forsooths and forth nights and wherefores. But once you do that, you have a conversation with William Shakespeare. So it's irrelevant that they lived in a different time. The relevance is that they lived at all and continue to live, and we hear them by virtue of them speaking to us in poetry.
American poetry, just like any other poetry, do you think it reflects the culture of American living?
That's a good question, and a pat answer would be, oh, certainly. But I don't believe that to be the case. I think that a poem or a poet reflects his or her own culture, sensibility, and reaction to it. You are an Indian American. I am a mongrel. I don't know what I am. What comprises me? I have so much of my background that I don't even know about. But my sensibility is going to be different than is your sensibility. We have Nikki Giovanni. We have Gwendolyn Brooks, African Americans, who spoke from their point of view. Were they American? They certainly were. Did they speak for all Americans? Well, yes, they did, because there's a universality in poetry, but they're telling the story of their community, their African American community, and it's a wonderful way to encounter it. So there is no American culture, particularly no American culture, given that we're from all over the globe, and how good that is.
I'm glad you explained it that way, because we are coming back to this voice of the poet again. When you read the poem, you get the voice of that person, whatever that person
Yes.
experienced and whatever that person wanted to share
I agree with you.
with the world.
And I like that you made that point. And it's impossible to read Walt Whitman without kind of, slowing down how you speak and, giving your voice some age.
Oh.
The same is true almost with Robert Frost. And then when there's Emily Dickinson, you tend to want to speak quietly. She'll make a good point.
And not
She'll
clicked to
well,
a
a little bit, yes. But you're right, to find that poet's voice, and we'll never know for sure, but we have to trust the power of our own imagination and brain to capture it as best we can.
What do you think of all these people who are trying to vote who's the best poet
Well,
of our times? Or
You're
we have there's this poet laureate Robert Pinsky,
Robert Pinsky, yeah.
and then there's
Brilliant man, and has written some wonderful poetry himself, but poetry isn't a tennis game, it's not a soccer match, it's not baseball, it's not a competition, and gosh, how can you possibly determine who's best or worst, or should you? And I don't think so. I have my stable of favorite poets, but you know what? I also remember as a much younger man thinking, I don't want to read so-and-so, I'm not interested. And then in graduate school or on the recommendation of a friend, I was urged to read so-and-so, and I fell in love with so-and-so. So to make a blanket condemnation that you don't like poet A and you prefer poet B, then read more of poet A and see if you don't change your mind.
Yeah. It might be a problem of not knowing enough and trying to choose from the very few that you've really read and you know.
One of my favorite questions at a gathering of poets, or I'm sorry, at an audience to hear poetry being read, or with my students, is how many people here like poetry? And you see a few hands go up. Okay, how many people here dislike poetry? And you see quite a few hands go up. And my response always is, do you like music? Do you like songs? Well, sure I do. Well, that's what poetry is. And you really cannot honestly claim to dislike poetry until you've read every poem by every poet in every language in the world. Until you've done that, you cannot honestly claim to dislike poetry, because you're going to find something you love.
How many hands went up when you asked about music?
Oh, well, everybody's hand went up when it said they
Everybody,
loved music,
okay.
sure. And that's what poetry is.
And it's all lyrics, and that's all
Well,
poems, basically.
the word lyric itself
It's
comes from the Greek lyre, which was the musical instrument that a poet would use to accompany himself or herself as they recited or sang a poem. That's where the word lyric comes from. And lyrical poetry celebrates nature, celebrates beauty, celebrates the wonders outside the doors of a structure. That's lyric poetry. And it's all poetry, and it all ought to be loved. And for anyone to claim they don't like it, that's not an accurate claim.
It might be that they don't understand it.
Yep.
When they read something, they're just thrown off by the words or whatever.
Well, I think it can be intimidating, and I always tell my students, not so much to be a comfort, but to be a realist, that you will never be asked, what does a poem mean? That's the worst question one can ask. What does it mean? Number one, it means precisely what it says. The question that we have to ask, the encounter we need to make, is, what effect does this poem have upon me? What did I experience viscerally or emotionally or mentally when I read this poem? That's the question to ask. It means what it says. Now, own that poem yourself and react to it.
The other reason I think people say I don't like poetry is because it's difficult to memorize. And in school, they've been asked to memorize, and
Right.
that might have created that kind of a little problem.
Well, I think that could be true, but I am of the feeling that you're given the assignment to memorize a poem in whatever grade, let's say grade school. There's going to come a time when you're going to be glad. It might be something, as innocuous as being on a date with that girl you're really wanting to impress, and you start reciting poetry. She thinks, that's pretty cool, you're very sensitive. Or maybe when you're, as you said earlier, with your children, and you're not reading a book to them, you're reciting a poem. And there is a great joy in that you're allowing these words that belong equally to you and to me, to come out of your mouth in the order that the poet intended for them to come out. It's a great joy. So maybe initially, oh boy, I have to memorize a poem, will be melted by the fact down the road when, I'm glad I had to learn that poem. You know, we're glad to learn our mathematics, we're glad to learn
yes.
geography and understand that South America is a bit scooched to the east of North America. It's good to know these things.
It helps when you're at work.
Of course it does.
You need
And here
a
in this
map
business,
to
you need to
file
know
your
math.
IRS.
Got a back time, right? They're back timing. Am I running out of, am I wearing out my welcome here? Okay, all right.
Yeah. There's also this poetry anthologist, David Lehman.
Okay.
He's also been compiling a list of the best poets or the best poems.
That's David Lehman's opinion, right? Am I in
Well,
his book?
yes.
Do you know if I'm in his book?
I didn't research that.
I didn't either.
We'll get to it.
Okay.
But T.S. Eliot ranks up there,
Oh, I'm sure. How could he not?
and Walt Whitman too.
Yes. As well they should, as well they should. But we have Tess Gallagher, we have Maxine Kumin, we have Mary Oliver, a Cape Cod poet who is just glorious, just glorious. I would crawl bare-kneed over broken glass to read a Mary Oliver poem.
I see.
She's just beautiful, just beautiful. And it's not a competition. I don't think you can realistically make a claim that this is a collection of the best poets or the best poems. It's
Yeah.
up to the individual.
Yeah, from these studies, Robert Pinsky's attempt to get people's opinions and votes, I think people can only choose from what they know.
Right.
And most of us are only exposed to the poems that we learned in school. And only some of us go beyond that and read poetry from elsewhere.
But if we only were to see a videotape of a baseball game that we watched on television from 1976, and that was the only baseball game we ever watched, it would get pretty boring. We need to watch subsequent baseball games and encounter different baseball games.
I think we have a call.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, hello? Hello?
I guess we don't have a call.
Huh? Is the call there? Did we lose it?
Try again. Try again. Still ringing. Press the wrong button.
Maybe it's Robert Pinsky.
The second one? Is it on line two?
The lower button.
Yeah. Line two?
Lower right. Line 1. Line 1. Lower right. Line
This one?
Line one?
bottom.
Yeah. Hello? I'm trying line one.
This is not going at all well, Usha.
No. How are we going to do this? Hello? I think we lost the call.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, hello?
Oh, now it's ringing again.
Okay.
We should recite some poetry at this point.
Hello? I'm sorry, the line doesn't seem to work. Are you there?
It's on Ira.
Oh, okay. I'm
Please
going to
call
give
us
this
back.
to Ira.
Okay.
No, you.
No, we're not going to
No?
do that. Is it my wife?
Which one?
Do you want me to bring home, what, a quart of milk?
Somebody on the phone.
Okay.
Hang up the phone?
All right.
Now, do you see the bottom right button, the big one?
Right
Which
here.
one? This one, the
Way at the
speaker.
bottom.
The speaker.
Yeah, you go psh, and then.
Oh, just that one. Okay, we know that.
Oh, call us back. Please call us
You don't
back.
have to pick it up.
Please call
Okay.
us back. Please call us back.
Yes, please call us back.
Maybe Comcast didn't pay the phone bill.
No, they've changed the phones now. Before we had a different one.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with this one, new one.
Okay.
But we can continue with our
Good. I hope they call
conversation.
back, though. Now I feel bad.
Tell me about how you wrote your new poem.
The long one I alluded to?
Yes.
Well, are we getting this call now? Should we take the call?
Are we
'Cause-
getting a call? Okay, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, you're on.
Hey.
Hey.
You found how to answer the phone.
Yes. Do you have a question for Ira?
I thank you, Ira Joe and Usha. I know if you're from India. Now, did you have to learn, and Ira, this is for you also, Rudyard Kipling. I love Rudyard Kipling. Now, Usha, were you learning a lot about Rudyard Kipling and practicing his poetry? And Ira Joe, what do you think of Rudyard Kipling? And could you recite?
Yeah, I read Rudyard Kipling, but
How about
I'll
Mary
have
Oliver?
Ira.
Something that you were raving about Mary Oliver.
I love Mary
How about
Oliver.
Your poems, and how about some insight into Rudyard Kipling? And that's my question.
Well, Rudyard Kipling would be, how sweet of you to call, thank you. Rudyard Kipling would not be highly regarded in India, would he?
yes, he was.
Oh, he was? Okay, I thought
Yes.
maybe the colonial aspect of it
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Because all of our poetry came from the good old England.
There's that wonderful joke about,
Right.
do you like Kipling? I don't know, I never kippled. So,
Well, maybe you should try.
yeah, Kipling is interesting and melodious and writes from a time and a sensibility where that was the vogue. And I love poetry in form, but I tend more toward R.S. Thomas, A.E. Housman, Wilfred Owen when it comes to roughly that era. Oh, and Thomas Hardy. I just adore Thomas Hardy and his poetry.
It's so interesting to hear because I would like you to recite something you wrote and maybe something from Mary Oliver because you just said you would crawl over broken glass on your bare legs.
Well, I confess I don't have any Mary Oliver with me, nor do I have any Mary Oliver memorized.
Okay.
But I did bring along some of my own poems.
Well, if you
Yeah,
would
please.
like to, I can say I'll be listening.
Okay. Well, shall I read a poem for you right now, relevantly entitled "An April"?
I'm going to hang up and continue to watch.
Okay.
Okay.
Bless you for
Okay,
calling.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That's pretty cool.
Do I have to shut off? No.
There we go. All right.
Went
So
off
do you want me to
one
read this poem, Usha?
side. Yes, please.
Okay, this is relevant. It's called An April Day. In the sun, a wind bothers the boughs of a pine across the street. It ripples a canvas awning as if thumbing the pages of an old book, so loved, so read it sits open and holy like a Bible on the table. There's no rent in the sky, no broken blue, all where the wind slipped from. It clears spring for the sun and the budding to come. And it was kind of cool, the sound effects that were added, a little beeping from the telephone. That was kind of a neat thing. This is really cool. I hope somebody else calls. I liked that. I don't know where our caller was from. Do you know where our caller was from? I don't know where she was from. She's probably in the control room. Is that right? Is that
It's
where?
our friend,
I see, a
Yes.
friend. Okay.
and she loves your show.
Well, bless her heart. That's very kind of her. No, she loves your show, and I love your show too. This is so nice of you to ask me here to talk about poetry, Usha. I appreciate
Well,
that.
I love poetry, and that's why it's my great honor
It's
to
in our
have you
soul.
here.
Well, I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
I'm not a poet. I cannot write, however much I tried.
Have you tried a lot?
Maybe not much after school.
What you,
You know.
I would urge you to get a nice anthology of poems, modestly priced. Go to a bookstore too. Don't
Yeah,
you know?
right.
Barnes and Noble, right over here in Danbury. You know, across from Olive Garden, great bookstore. Or Books on the Common in Ridgefield. Better still. Get yourself a nice anthology of poems and read them aloud. You have, you know, your diction is wonderful. I love it. You have that bit of British burnish in your speech, and it lends itself to poetry. So you owe it to yourself. You owe it perhaps to your fellow workers here at Comcast.
Well, thank you so much. I'll
Well,
try
thank you.
when I find some time for this.
Got to make time for poetry. That's my theory.
Yeah, I think poetry helps us. It calms the soul. I do read once in a while when I just want to get away from it all. And then it really gives me a good escape. The only thing is I haven't attempted memorizing any of the new ones that I read.
Well, I don't, you know, I guess I know fragments of poems. Emily Dickinson, there's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. There's more to the poem than that, but those opening lines are just glorious. Robert Frost, I'm going out to clean the pasture spring. I'll only stop to rake the leaves away and wait to watch the water clear I may. I shan't be gone long, you come too. I'm going out to fetch the little calf that's standing by its mother. It's so young it totters when she licks it with her tongue. I shan't be gone long. You come too. Isn't that beautiful?
It's very beautiful.
And I use that as an example for my students that a poem need not be obfuscating, need not be cluttered, need not be what the heck is going on. It is direct. It isn't simple. It's unfettered, and it's beautiful.
It could even sound like a country song,
Yes, it could.
words-wise.
Well, there you go. There you go. And some of the fine poems in our language are country songs, sure.
Tell me about your poem.
Well-
what did you do? I mean, how did you get started on it?
You're talking about the long poem I
The
mentioned
long
earlier.
poem, yeah. Because
it's very
the last
unusual.
time you were here, you had all your short poems.
Right. And I brought a couple of my books here, and this one will be a bit bigger than they are, and it will be other poems that are considerably shorter. But this poem is 30 or 31 pages. I forget, it's in manuscript, it's that long, but I don't know when it's printed in book form, how long it will be, roughly that. Like, I've worked on it 8 years or 10 years, and the title of the poem is the title of the book, The Creek at the End of the Lawns. And it tells the story of a young man, his love for a young woman, her love for him, and he, through the magic that is poetry, encounters a ghost from this little town. And there is a narrator who tells the story when their conversation doesn't tell the story. But this young man has a conversation with this old ghost who, because of encounter with alcohol, has left the Vale of Tears, but is able to visit as a spirit with this young man, and they talk about life, and they argue, and they do a little bit of laughing, and to me it was great fun to write, and it's a verse play. I'm hoping maybe to present it at some place in the neighborhood, just as a play of one act that runs about 35 minutes.
That's a nice thing about a long poem. You can give a story there.
Well, it is a narrative poem, but there's, I hope, a lot of lyricism in it as well. And I wrote it in blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter, and that was great fun. Great fun. I have a friend, a professor at UConn, who said, well, I'd never attempt that. He certainly should and could because he's a very talented man. But I didn't find it to be at all difficult. I thought it was great fun.
What is a blank verse?
Oh, blank verse, we've all heard the term iambic pentameter. That is a 5-beat, 10-syllable line. This is what Shakespeare wrote in. And when it's unrhymed, Robert Frost did that a lot, William Wordsworth a lot, it's called blank verse. As opposed to free verse, which is unrhymed usually. Walt Whitman and Allen Ginsberg wrote free verse. Well, blank verse is still disciplined in the number of beats in a line and the number of syllables that accompany those beats.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and it was just great fun, and I would, drum out with my fingers at my writing desk to make sure each line was as I wanted it to be. Because the interesting thing with poetry, as with fudge, you're always shaping it when it's molten until it reaches the point that, now we have fudge that can be sliced and enjoyed. Now we have poetry that is in the form that I intended, that I desired, that I envisioned, that I dreamed, and now it's ready to be enjoyed.
Is there humor in this?
I would like to think there is, yes. Yes.
The writing?
I'm
Because you have a spontaneous tendency to be humorous.
well, yes.
And I'm wondering if that came
Well,
in this poetry.
I usually don't write funny poems. I have a couple that are humorous that I always read at a reading. One is about stealing grapes from a vineyard. Another is about turn off your cell phone. Another is about visiting my book in the bookstore, where, as it happens, alphabetically is situated between Eliot and Frost, given that Fisher would come in between the two. But generally, I write about serious subjects, which is, I'm also an entertainer who should have spent my life in show business. So, my wife is such a sweetheart and such a good audience, but we often talk about it that I'm not a funny person, but I can be funny, which is an important distinction to me.
When you were here last year, you read that poem.
Which
about
poem?
stealing
Oh,
from
yes.
the vineyard.
In a lovely vineyard by the lake, yeah.
That was beautiful, and I found it quite humorous.
Thank you.
It was nice.
Thank you.
And I want to hear about the one about cell phone.
Well, you know what? I might have it here.
Can you read that?
Well, sure. Can you give me a moment to find it here?
Sure.
What I do is I print my poems for a reading I print them in very large type here, so here's the poem about, there we go. All right, the cell phone poem, you ready? Yeah. And for our purposes here, I use the term song to be synonymous with poem.
Oh, I see.
The meter for song, the word song fits better in the meter, so it's called cell phone. Silence, please, your little cell phone. Shortly, its damnable ringtone is a loved one calling from home or the bank about that car loan. It's just that we're in the middle of a song. And the middle is a zone. Its moody, emotional tone is being struck. You must have known, so silence, please, that prattling phone, because we're in the sweet middle of a song. In this techno age, be wary, beeper, pager, and BlackBerry, like black ice in January. So silence, Mary, Harry, Larry, and Gary. Can't you hear? We're in the middle of a song. How many bars, you ask? Scary. A dead zone here? Well, not very. That noise it makes is downright glary. It's grating, hating, and blary. Silence, please. We're in the middle of a song.
Oh.
Thank you for the applause. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it actually, on a couple of occasions, there has been that embarrassing moment where in the audience, someone's cell phone will go off, will ring. So I usually have this in reserve that I can read and try to shame them into turning off that cell phone.
I know. Everybody needs a cell phone these days.
Well, see, now I don't agree with that verb needs. Everyone has a cell phone in these days.
But
I
they
have
don't
one.
need to
I leave
keep
it in
it
the
on
car.
all the
I leave it
time.
in the car
Yeah.
all night. It's out in the car right now. So I don't think we need cell phones. It's lovely that we have them. It's easier, but I don't think we need them.
Oh, have you talked to the young people these days?
Believe me, all of my students in my class, I teach a 3-hour class. We always take a nice 10, 15-minute break. As soon as the break hits, bam, we're on the cell phone.
So they shut it off during a class?
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that's a good thing.
Well, it is a good
We need to
thing.
carry it, but we shouldn't keep it on all the time.
I don't think we should carry it.
We shouldn't even carry it.
Keep it on a string hanging out the window. That's what it ought to be. Not on your
Keep it
body.
away.
Yeah.
Well,
That's how I feel about cell phones.
it's very interesting, but now I'm finding little tots in elementary schools. They have their phones.
I don't see how that makes our life better.
I don't see that either.
And there was a wonderful article in Sunday's New York Times in the Sunday Review section. I wish I could recall the name of the author, but I've saved it. It's a wonderful article about how, okay, we're in constant contact, but we're not really conversing, and we're not really touching each other emotionally. And you'll see people walking down the street. I've seen a young man and a young woman holding hands, but each is on a cell phone. I can't imagine they're talking to each other on the cell phone. It just seems to have pulled us farther away from intimacy rather than closer.
Yes, I think so too.
That's my seasoned opinion.
Sometimes these same youngsters who are constantly on their cell phones, when they meet a few new people at the same table in a party, they're unable to make conversation with their neighbors.
That's a good point, and that point is made in that article that was in the Times. It's a good article.
Oh, I didn't read that, but
The Sunday Review section of last Sunday's New York Times. Yeah.
I noticed this in a few parties where I went to, and there were these young people, and they were all put on the same table. Is there another call coming in?
I don't see that light. Oh, there is.
Oh, yes. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Do you have a question for Ira?
Yeah. I know you're talking about poetry, but you were talking about cell phones. And do you know about the studies of cell phones and the killing of bees? That the cell phones disorient the bees, and then they die. Do you know anything about that?
No. You mean, do you say bees, the insect?
Yeah, bees, honeybees.
Wow.
Oh, they die with the microwaves from the cell phones?
I don't know what it is. It's radio waves or microwaves. I don't know, but there have been some studies, and the bees get disoriented, and then they can't find their way back to the hive, and then they die.
How sad is that?
Yeah, there's been some studies. You should look it up.
Okay. Do you read poetry?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good.
Could you tell
I
us
love
your name?
Robert Frost, and actually, I like most poets.
Could you tell us your name?
Sherry.
Okay.
Terry?
Sherry.
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 Okay. Well,
All right. Well, thank you, and I'm enjoying the program.
Yeah, thank you very much.
good to speak with you,
calling.
Sherry. Thank you. I had not heard that. about the adverse effect
I
on bees of
haven't read that
cell
either.
phones.
So
Well,
maybe we'll go and Google today, read up more on that. I wanted to ask you so many things about teaching and learning of poetry, just to help those who would like to try it but are afraid to.
I think it's really good to have a teacher who will serve as a guide. I like to speak in terms of metaphor, taking the student by the hand metaphorically and going out into what I metaphorically refer to as the meadow that is the poem. In the meadow, you're going to encounter beautiful trees. You're going to encounter golden, sunlit hay. There's also going to be a dark part of that meadow where the moss hangs from gnarled branches, and it's so dark like night in there that it's spooky and scary and perhaps inhabited by creatures who can harm us. There's also at the edge of the meadow a lovely city that is catching the sunlight as it falls and glints on the glass walls of the buildings and reflects down upon the street. But there's also that seedy, dirty, dangerous alley that you dare not walk down. If you do, you might not walk out of that alley. The meadow has everything. It's all about life. And if we ignore that, then we're missing a great drama that is unfolding and given to us as little squiggles of ink on a piece of paper. That's an amazing thing. What the human mind can do, Usha, to take these squiggles of ink and translate them into images, translate them into sounds, translate them into fragrances and tastes.
Yeah,
It's a wonderful thing.
Already.
What's
right?
that?
We have already learned to read
Yes.
and understand the word and imagine what it is.
Well, that's just it. That'd be the human mind is an amazing piece of equipment. And if we allow everything to be created for us, be it the TV screen or the movie screen, and believe me, I love to watch movies. I'm an absolute maven when it comes to movies. But if we allow that to be our only source of imagination, then we're selling ourselves short. Take these squiggles of ink, let them paint pictures in our minds, and understand and acknowledge the intelligence we bring to the task. This is what I remind my students of. It's something that, that the goddess of poetry, whoever she is, will bless them with an understanding come the end of the semester that, wow, I have encountered something worthwhile. And not only do I understand it, which is always a joy to see happen, not only do I understand it, I kind of like it. I kind of love it. It's a wonderful experience.
In your new book, is there only one poem, or is that a collection?
No, it's a collection, and as I say, the one poem, the title poem, "The Creek at the End of the Lawns," is an epic, lengthy poem, but it's surrounded by shorter poems on either side, and I'm very excited about it. It's an exciting thing. It's like the birth of a baby to have a new book come out, and
When
it will
was
be
your
my
last
third.
book?
My last book was 3 years ago.
And that was
Songs
is that the
from.
one?
No, here we go. Well, sure. Let's hold this little baby up. My first book was this one, "Some Holy Wait in the Village Air," and then it was succeeded by this one, "Songs from an Earlier Century," and I love them. I'm just so excited that they exist.
Yeah, you have some beautiful poems there.
Well,
And
thank you.
I'm sure you're a great teacher. But did you have a good teacher in school that inspired you?
Yes, I did.
Poetry.
Who unfortunately died the year after we studied with him. But yes, he was an excellent teacher. And what was particularly poignant and good about his approach in the classroom was he had such marvelous taste in poetry. I remember reading William Cullen Bryant, a poem of his called "To a Waterfowl," which was. And I went kicking and screaming like my classmates said, I don't want to learn about poetry. And then I encountered that poem, and I fell instantly in love with it because I understood it, and it spoke to my soul. And not that I was any intellect, I certainly wasn't. It's a poem that invites you to understand it, and I did, and took such joy in it, and have taken joy in it ever since.
Don't you think some of the poems from a few centuries ago, they're kind of not very clear? They have like hidden meaning or some other meaning.
Robert Frost talked about ulteriority, that there were, as we have the term ulterior motives, there were different levels of considerations going on within a poem. But perhaps you're talking about, I don't know, Christopher Marlowe or Spencer or Milton. Yes,
The
language.
difficult to read ones.
Well, difficult to read if we don't take the time. I always tell my student, you never read just one book. You have the book that you're reading, and you have a dictionary. And it's incumbent upon you to look up the word you don't understand. If you don't look up the word you don't understand, then you don't deserve to understand the poem. And poets write to be understood. If you don't, you're not a poet. You're messing with people, and that's not what poetry is about. Look up the word you don't understand. Here's an example. When Juliet says on the balcony, "Oh, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?"
Yeah.
Well, everybody thinks, where are you? No, she's not saying, wherefore art thou Romeo? She's saying, why are you Romeo? Why are you a
Yeah.
Montague? I'm a Capulet. Our stupid
That we
families are arguing and feuding with each other. We can't get together. So, Romeo, Romeo, why are you a Montague? I'm a Capulet. I love you. I want us to be together. I'm sorry. I apologize for hitting my microphone control room. But when
So
you
people
understand,
don't- yeah. So
when you
somebody
understand,
has to, when you're a young person, you need someone to explain that to you.
well, yes, you
Otherwise
do.
may not understand.
And if you have the good fortune to sit in a class where that is being explained, all the better. If you're alone and you're reading Romeo and Juliet, or if you're alone and reading T.S. Eliot, have a dictionary, at least a dictionary standing by. T.S. Eliot would benefit. I have a wonderful copy of The Wasteland that is annotated by Helen Vendler, a Harvard professor. She's just wonderful. And it really helps you get through The Wasteland. And I don't mean that it's something that needs to be got through. It's something you need to be aided in the journey you make through that particular poem. You need help sometimes. And then you have, unfettered poetry where you don't need help, you only need heart.
Yeah, the example was Shakespearean works.
Yes.
I needed all those teachers to explain those to me.
Right, but you
And then-
could have,
but then I
but you have such a
do
wonderful
remember.
mind, you could do it yourself too. With there are various Shakespeare guides which help you through the plots of the plays and also unpack. I like that term. Unpack what is intricate and meaningful in the sonnets as well.
Is it phone? Okay. Hello.
Hey, Usha.
Yeah, who's this?
How are you? And hi, Ira.
Hi, how are you? Who are you?
I'm Gina.
Hi, Gina.
Do you have
I want to ask you, what can we do in this day and age? Because I'm suffering listening here, not because of your show, but because of the pain I feel that we are losing our children. We are not giving them the background that they need in the classroom anymore. It's all about testing. It's all about fast-paced, outcome-based education. It's not about enjoying the beauty of the word anymore. And it's really sad because you can see the kids yourself. When you're out and about, Ira and Usha, and you see these kids, they're not interested in learning about this because they're not getting exposed to it. So we're going to lose this great art that you are sharing with us tonight. And how can we, in your opinion, get it back in terms of this hi, how are you, LOL, MAFO, and all that other junk that they write in print, and nobody knows how to read and write in that beauty anymore.
Well, remember, there's
Any ideas?
There's a wonderful. I share your sentiments, Gina. I do, and I share your worries. But I have confidence personally in the power that is literature. There are such incredible stories in literature and such incredible beauty. Remember, there's that piece of scripture which says, when I was a child, I was interested in childish things, and then I grew up and I put away childish things. I'm woefully paraphrasing here, but let's hope that is the case as well. Do you remember, Gina, probably, you're probably not old enough, when I was in high school, I thought the greatest event on the planet was a record hop. I wouldn't walk across this studio in this day and age to go to a record hop. We put away those things that were so vital, so important when we were children. But you know what? From the time I was a little boy, a poem has meant something to me, and I've never lost that enthusiasm. It has only grown with the years. And I'm not saying everybody will embrace poetry to any great extent, but I am saying we have great literature, and I'm confident it is so great, it is so powerful, and it has such a staying power that we will never be without it. We have to take hope in what I believe to be that fact. However, we also have to encourage the young people to, well, turn the darn thing off and give conversation a chance and give a good book a chance. That's what I feel.
I do believe in everything that you've said. I just don't see it happening as much anymore,
Yeah.
and that people are not really turning to to read poetry anymore, where there would be a time in school you would do choral speaking, you would learn about poetry.
Rhetoric.
Now,
Remember we learned
not
rhetoric?
there.
Yeah. Well,
Well, anyway, I love your program, and I'm enjoying it so much, and I'll let you go because I know time is short.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for everything.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thanks
calling, Gina.
Yep.
And
Nice. I enjoyed it tremendously. Come back. Bye.
goodbye. How sweet.
yeah, hi, Ira, as you know, that's why I was asking all these questions about how can we get someone to read poetry and
Well,
learn poetry, and so it was wonderful. You know, I hope people listen to what you said.
I don't
and-
know. I don't know. I am very short on wisdom. I really am. But I am high on enthusiasms, and poetry is my enthusiasm, as is my little dog Lily. Do you know? And this is another thing. We need to speak to a young student's passion. What is it you're really interested in? I think there's something poetic about these games of dragons and the like. I don't know them, but you know, the video
Yeah, the
games that
video
involve
games,
that.
yeah.
Okay, I think that could stimulate one's imagination. Harry Potter is a great example of this marvelous world that Rowling has created. I haven't
children
read
is-
it,
yeah,
but I
children read
understand.
that a lot,
And
so.
the students I'm teaching, that generation, they really love Harry Potter. Well, that's literature, and whatever we can do to nurture that, to encourage that. We're stuck with cell phones. However, we can put them down and pick up a book and encounter the magic that is the book. That's what
We
I
only
think.
have about a minute left, I think. If you remember, last time we spoke, we discussed poetry. I was telling you about the New York mayor wanting to put in poetry. Did you know? if
You mean in
he
the subways?
Yeah, did he put it?
Well, I think so. I think they're what they call poetry in motion. Such a hackneyed phrase, but good for him, sure.
Yeah.
I've ridden on the subways, and yes, there's Emily Dickinson, you know.
Oh, how nice.
There's Robert Frost, there's some Shakespeare. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But you know what? Being in New York City is being in a poem. It really is.
Yeah, that itself is.
It
and
is.
then it's just more beautiful because of the poem.
Yep. Thank you for allowing me to be on your program.
Oh,
Usha.
it's my pleasure to have you here, and we only have about 30 seconds left. Is there anything you would like to add regarding your new book, how difficult it was or how
Just
easy
buy
it
it.
was?
Shamelessly buy it. Buy the book. Would it kill you to buy the book?
No, it's going to be available on the
Well,
Midsummer.
available, yes, at Books on the Common in Ridgefield. I hope Barnes & Noble here in Danbury. And thank you to your lovely crew as well.
Okay. I think we are about done. Thank you all for watching, and that was a wonderful discussion with Ira on poetry. And until next time, goodbye.